In the early 90s, an Amiga magazine in the UK held a contest for budding young programmers to get a game published. One of the entrants was a young chap by the name of Andy Davidson, who entered his turn-based strategy game, Total Wormage. A game that features up to 4 teams of worms attempting to blow each other up across randomly generated landscapes using a limited arsenal of weapons, as worms tend to do. Andy's game didn't win, but it did get an honourable mention, which led Andy to seek a publisher for the game. But it wasn't until he took the game to the Electronic Computer Trade Show and showed it to publishers Team 17 that he hit success. They signed a deal for him on the spot, and then presumably they went off to get very, very drunk, which led to the invention of the Appletini, I'd like to imagine.
Team 17 eventually released the game as Worms, and it was the first major multi-platform release for the company, who at the time had mostly stuck with the Amiga. Not only that, but it was immensely successful worldwide.
Team 17 had a massive hit on their hands, and when a company has a massive hit on their hands, there's only one thing they can do: nurture it, look after it, and help to protect the... No, obviously that's a load of bollocks. What they actually did is they released as many spin-offs, tie-ins and sequels as they could, and essentially milk that sucker dry. There have been 17 titles in the core series and 4 or 5 spin-offs over the last 18 years, and we're going to try and look at as many of them as possible over the course of the next few minutes. Maybe we'll run long. Hopefully not. Who knows? But let's start with the first one.
There's a lot of variety when it comes to ports of the original. For instance, there's the Amiga version, which was built on the same code as Andy Davidson's Total Wormage. In fact, much of the programming for the Amiga version was done by Davidson himself.
It's not the most colourful version of the game, but it is arguably the most pure, if that's the kind of thing you care about.
Most of you will be more familiar with the PlayStation version, which was an early success for the console and one of the first games to get re-released on the Platinum range, which is the European equivalent of the Greatest Hits selection. The PlayStation version is identical to the Atari Jaguar and Sega Saturn versions, as well as the Mac and PC versions of the game, which, if you're interested, can be bought on Steam and Good Old Games for less than the cost of a big lunch.
There are a couple of interesting quirks in these versions of the game. For instance, in most other ports of Worms, when the worm goes to throw a grenade, it flicks it up with its tail and headbutts it. That still happens in this version of the game, but instead of launching from the moment when the grenade hits the head, it launches from just above and slightly behind the worm. It's, isn't that tedious? Isn't your life in some way cheapened from knowing that information? Welcome to my world.
Another quirk, which is exclusive to the PC and Mac versions, involves the weapon hotkeys, which allow you to quickly switch between different weapons. Holding down the hotkey for the bazooka and the minigun will make your worm flip between the two weapons, and a well-timed whack of the spacebar will make your worm fire a minigun which launches bazooka missiles instead.
Nobody knows whether this was intentional or if it was a glitch, and nobody's going to tell us because, and I don't know if you knew this, but everyone at Team 17 is basically drunk all of the time. Which might explain how the glitch got there in the first place.
Then there's the Super Nintendo and Genesis versions, which are identical to one another. These versions don't feature randomly generated maps, and they both have missing weapons, including the ninja rope. If this is the version you grew up playing, I'm sorry, but your childhood is built upon a foundation of deceit.
Finally, there's Worms the Director's Cut, the last release of the original version of Worms, and Team 17's last game for the Amiga. But more than that, it also served as a proving ground for new ideas.
It's the first game in the series to feature weapons like the baseball bat, super sheep and holy hand grenade that would become staples of the series, and also features a bunch of other series firsts. For instance, this is the first game that lets you drop weapons from mid-air or from a ninja rope. It's the first game that lets you fire your ninja rope multiple times while airborne, called Tarzaning in this entry but recoined roping in future titles. And there's also a couple of exclusive weapons in this game, the most notable being the sheep on a rope, so called because it's a ninja rope with a sheep on the end of it.
As well as this, Worms the Director's Cut features some of the most versatile customization features in the series, including new features when it comes to map creation and the ability to create new terrain styles for random map generation. Sadly, this version of the game only sold 5,000 copies worldwide, being as it was released at a time when the Amiga was in a severe state of decline. But it wasn't for nothing, as many of the features from this version went on to later games in the series.
Games such as Worms Armageddon, which incorporates many of the Director's Cut's ideas and adds a wealth of new features, including a more involving single-player campaign, a ton of brand new weapons and settings, and more customization options than you can shake a stick at. The number of teams that could participate in the game was increased from 4 to 6, and the maximum number of worms on a team upped from 4 to 8.
Armageddon was the first game in the series since the original to see a console release, but were these ports any good?
For the most part, yes. Ignoring the Game Boy Color version, a port so bad it's been expressly forbidden from being used as a form of torture by the Geneva Convention, the PlayStation and Dreamcast ports were pretty faithful, with some limitations added due to system restrictions. For instance, neither version features fire, meaning that the flamethrower and petrol bomb are both missing from the game, while gas canisters, which were introduced back in Worms 2, don't leave fire behind after exploding. The team cap is also restricted to the 4 Worms 4 teams limit of the previous games.
Customization has also been significantly reduced. In the PC version, you can choose your Worms speech bank, their grave, their flag, the victory fanfare, but in the PS1 and Dreamcast versions, most of that has been stripped down. You can still choose your gravestone, but all the other settings are basically missing, and the speech bank setting is a general sound option that affects the entire game as opposed to being team specific.
The Dreamcast and PlayStation versions have their own graphical pros and cons as well. The PlayStation port supports widescreen, but the graphics are much blockier. Meanwhile, the Dreamcast version features significantly smoother graphics, but doesn't have widescreen support.
Not that it would have mattered in 1999, as the only people who would have had a widescreen TV were the preposterously rich and people who'd won their TV on The Price is Right.
There's also the N64 version, which has an absolutely rotten menu interface and makes terrible use of the N64 controller. It's a bit like discovering an Olympic-sized swimming pool filled with vomit. No matter how much you may enjoy swimming, you're probably going to want to go somewhere else.
And that way you won't get chunks of carrots stuck in your teeth.
Worms Armageddon also forms the basis for the next game in the series, Worms World Party. Well, I say it forms the basis, it's basically the exact same bloody game, though the Dreamcast version does have online play, which doesn't work anymore.
The next game in the series marks Worms' first jump into 3D, and is called... Oh, hang on, let me check. Worms 3D, apparently.
Worms 3D was developed with multiple platforms in mind, so they're all fairly uniform, although the US release of the Xbox version features online play, which, again, doesn't work anymore. But honestly, nobody cares.
No, nobody cares. No one. And you know why? Because Worms 3D is terrible. It's crap. It really is. Oh, don't get me wrong, it's ambitious, but it's shit. And as there's bugger all for us to say about the ports... Oh wait, no, hang on.
Worms 3D and its follow-up, Worms 4 Mayhem, were combined into one title and ported to the PS3 and 360 as Worms Ultimate Mayhem, which also saw a PC release.
There. Now we're done, and we can move on to the next game in the franchise, which is... Damn it! Fuck, I thought I memorized all these. Worms. Wait, no, hang on, that's not right. Is that right? That is right. Huh.
In 2007, a remake of Worms was released on Xbox Live Arcade, except it wasn't just a remake, rather it was a port of the 2006 PSP game Worms Open Warfare, which was... Oh, alright, yeah, that was a remake.
A remake which features some incredibly wonky physics and enemy AI who are apparently trained at the Flash Git Military Academy for jammy bastards. They can throw a grenade from across the map, ping it off 2 different walls, and have it come to a rest on your head. And then it explodes, which isn't very nice.
This version was later ported to the PlayStation 3 with a handful of additional weapons, including the Holy Hand Grenade and the Super Sheep, which were added because people kept complaining that a remake of a Worms game that didn't feature the Holy Hand Grenade and the Super Sheep inexplicably left out the Holy Hand Grenade and the Super Sheep. This was followed by the confusingly named Worms 2 Armageddon for the 360 and PS3, which takes the best bits of various Worms games and tries to smush them together into one game with varying degrees of success, all while screaming, "Look! Look, it's just like Worms Armageddon! That's the Worms game everybody loves! Please buy this one!"
Worms 2 Armageddon was ported to the PC and Mac under a different title, Worms Reloaded, and included much of the content that had been made available for Worms 2 Armageddon as DLC. Then they released more DLC for it anyway. The swine.
While the PC and Mac versions feature online play, sadly it's not cross-platform, and some of the additional DLC isn't even available for the Mac version at all. There's also a Mac exclusive version called Worms Special Edition, which can be purchased via the App Store, but it doesn't feature online play at all. Bastards.
Worms 2 Armageddon was also ported to the iPhone, the iPad and Android-based phones, but it's not very good. Honestly, the touchscreen controls don't do it any favours, so So that's basically it. I didn't mention Worms Crazy Golf, Worms Blast or Worms Pinball because honestly, do you even care? No, nobody does. So that's it. Go away.
Hell hath no fury like a... Such sweet success.